siblings passed away and left their house neglected, but these auctioneers made a jaw-dropping discovery. After Richard and Sandra Martin from the English Midlands both passed away, a local auction firm was called in. They were tasked with valuing and selling the deceased siblings' belongings to meet the conditions of their will. Literally, when the evaluating experts entered the Martins' farmhouse in 2015, it was like stepping into another world. Richard and Sandra had lived in this little village in England for more than 7 decades. They moved to the quaint farmhouse with their parents in the 1940s. As a family, the Martins rejected many of the comforts of modern life. Instead, they decided to live a simple existence that revolved around their quaint Queen Anne-styled farmhouse, their lawn and their animals. In some ways, the Martins' lifestyle appeared to be pretty idyllic. Nevertheless, that peace and quiet was shattered for Richard when he enlisted in the military to do his duty during World War II. While Richard was away serving with the Royal Air Force, Sandra remained at the family home. The dutiful daughter still helped her mom and dad on the farm but also developed a love of music and the arts. And it was thanks to this interesting culture that led Sandra away from writing in her hometown with trips into the city. She had formed a connection with the Belgrade Theatre, which had resulted in the hosting of many actors down the years. After the battle and having done his but for king and country, Richard returned home. And as the years rolled by, the senior Martins passed away, but the devoted siblings continued with their modest lives. Neither of them ever married, and as well as rejecting spouses and children, they appeared to have said no to almost all modern innovations. It seemed that they preferred the house the way it was when they moved in. Richard and Sandra had sold the farm's animals, but they continued to work the land just as they had always done. Sadly, in 2011, Sandra eventually passed away, having reached her 80s, and 4 years later, in March of 2015, Richard passed away at the age of 90. So, for the first time since the 1940s, the farm that they had was unoccupied. There were no close relatives in the Martins to inherit the property. The contents of Richard and Sandra's will remains confidential, but the executives were about to do something radical. In order to settle with the beneficiaries, the state's executives decided to sell the farm and auction off its contents. And this is just where things got a little interesting. Local property agents had stepped in to organize the sale of real estate and everything in it. However, the experts had little idea of what they were getting themselves into. Indeed, when the auction valuers entered the farm, they found that it was like entering a time machine. At first glance, it seemed that the family had not altered one thing in the house since they moved in almost 70 years ago. Furniture and fittings, ornaments and everyday items, everything seemed to lend fascinating insights into family life in the 1940s. Furthermore, many of the family's former possessions were still older. Antiques of all kinds had been found throughout the substantial 9-bedroom property. Some were decorative, and some were purely functional. Indeed, the Martins had left behind things they had used right till the end, including a traditional larder in place of a modern refrigerator, wrought iron bed frames, a typewriter and an old sewing machine. Other items reflected the hobbies and passions of the siblings. Among the astonishing artifacts was a range of old instruments, records and sheet music, some of which dated back to the 1920s. The auction firm also found archaic film cameras and old pairs of binoculars. One of the more bizarre contents was an amputation kit from the battle. One of the executives was astonished by the farm and everything in it. The house contents have not even been touched since their late parents' time. It's certainly a time warp of interesting ideas, curiosities and even battle memorabilia. Even though the Martin siblings never married, they had an interesting life, and it's really the end of a bygone era. In addition, the Martins' neighbor, Stuart, explained that the siblings were of the make-do-and-mend generation. Richard and Sandra had grown up in the Depression era, survived the hardships of World War II, and even experienced the posterity of the post-battle years. And all this had evidently rubbed off. It might have been an old person's house, but the siblings never threw anything away. Stewart also said that before recycling came in, they were very conscientious people and kept everything. Prior to the grand sell-off of the farm's contents, an open house was held. This allowed members of the public to learn about the Martins' lifestyle and view the auction lots ahead of time. And according to a representative from the firm, throwing the doors open proved incredibly popular. Apparently, awestruck visitors had traveled from far and wide to wonder at the museum pieces. Many of the attendees were hoping to claim a pieces of history for themselves. In the end, all 500 lots available were snapped up at the auction. Among the items was a gold pocket watch that fetched an impressive £600. It was a really good day with a great crowd. After hosting the event to sell off Martin's lifetime possessions, the farm itself went on sale for almost $900,000. Even though Richard and Sandra might be gone, their legacy now lives on in the lives of many auction buyers.